Good morning to all the participants joining us from Europe, and good afternoon for those who are in China. The EU SME Centre and EUROCHAMBRES would like to thank you for joining this first edition of the Understanding China training program held in a virtual format. My name is Laura Velasco, and I will be moderating this 2-day conference. Today's conference, this is the first session, comprises 5 different speeches. But before the conference starts, please allow me to share a few housekeeping notes. The conference is being recorded, and the recordings will be available afterwards through a link that will be shared after the event. The slides of the speakers will also be available, and you will also receive them together with the recording. If you have any question for the presenters, please use the Q&A feature so that we can coordinate them and make sure that your answer is responded. And if you have any technical question, please reach out to me directly via the chat function. Today's session, as I was mentioning, comprises 5 different speeches. The first one is the China Policy Environment and EU SME Business Confidence Survey, which will be presented by Esther Cañada Amela. The second is the impact of COVID-19 on the mobility of personnel between China and Europe by Rosario Terminio. The third one is the Partner Corner. Here we have 2 speakers, guest speakers from Boca Mechelen campaign and Enterprise Estonia. And last but not least, we will be sharing the experience of 2 European funded projects, the EU SME Center and the China IP SME Help Desk, presented by Alessio Pettino and Jim Stugman. And now, without further ado, I am pleased to welcome the first speaker of the opening remarks, Mr. Igor Kalinic, Head of Sector Competitiveness and Internationalization at the European Innovation Council and SME Executive Agency. Igor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laura. I hope you can hear me. Yes, my name is Igor Kalinic. I am working for the European Executive Agency that is in charge of this project. And it's a little bit complicated, the name. So it's European Innovation Council and SME Agency. It's a new agency that started just a few months ago, but it's also successor of a very well-known agency, the EUSME. So European Executive Agency for Small Medium Enterprises. So there is a continuity, and we have actually added to the agency an important element, which is the European Innovation Council. And some of you might know it's a very interesting initiative of the European Commission trying to boost the power of the startups and scale-ups all across Europe. I'm very happy to be here and to open this conference. Also because this is a very, very important project for the European Commission. Of course, all the projects that we manage in our sector that are more than 100, around 140 are all very, very important, but sometimes there are some ones that are more important than the others, more equal than the others. This project is really important for us, especially in these times. Maybe at the moment, doing business in China is on, let's say, on a pause, or there is not much really doing, but we know that this is really a technical pause, and as soon as the business gets back to the normal, the role of China will be very important, especially for the small medium enterprises. So that's why this initiatives such like this one are very important. Let me just quickly a little bit give you introductions of how we work. So in the European Commission, we have basically director generals, you can call them ministries, and executive agencies. I used to say that director generals, or they are the head, and we are the hand. So when it comes to the strategical policy thinking, much long-term thinking, that it's more in the director generals. When it comes to the execution of the programs, monitoring of the programs, well, that is more in the executive agencies. However, we work as one body, as European Commission. So there is really not any reason for you to have any doubts. I see that also the chat is active and somebody is sending greetings from sunny Belgrade. Well, For those ones that are in Brussels, it's really not like that. It's really the usual, like what you probably remember of Brussels. We have also sunny days, but not these days. Okay, let's go further and towards also getting to end. So this program, a little bit of institutional communication. This project is funded under COSME, which is the program for the competitiveness of small medium enterprises. And this program has finished in 2020, but is renewed in the new work plan, multinational financial framework, under the new single market program. And there will be also a chapter that is for small medium enterprises. And we will all continue aiming at strengthening the governance of the internal market, ensuring high level protection of the consumers, and especially what is most interesting for us is the supporting the competitiveness of the industry, especially about of the small medium enterprises. Now, the budget is of 1 billion euros for the next 7 years. I will not, I will stop very quickly. What I want to say just in the end is that we will keep monitoring the actions. You can always come back to us for further questions. I hope I will be able to stay till the end, but I know that my agenda can be quite jeopardized, so I might be forced to jump on other issues. But my colleague, Giovanna D'Adamio, who is the project advisor in charge of the project, will stay with you throughout the entire morning, and in case of need, you can come back to me. I wish you a very productive and successful event. And that's all from my side. And as I promised to Laura, I hope I stayed short enough.
Thank you very much, Igor. It was indeed short, but very insightful. And we would like to thank you again for making yourself available to be here today. Now, I would like to introduce the second speaker of our opening remarks, Mr. Ben Butter, CEO at EUROCHAMBRES. Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laura. Good morning, everybody. And yes, indeed, as Igor said, it's a very wet and blustery morning here in Brussels. Classic Belgian autumnal weather, unfortunately. But yeah, I think we're kind of used to it here. But great that so many of you are with us from all across Europe, and great to see you too, Renzo, over in Beijing. Yeah, it's really good to hear from Igor the importance that the agency attaches to the program, to the EU SME Centre, and to this training program today, because we share that view. For Chambers of Commerce and for EuroChambres, this is a very important activity. And why is that? That's for two main reasons, I guess. The first, and I'm not breaking any major news here, China is a big market and an important market. And the second point is it's also a complicated market. So to be able to engage in such activities to help the European business community, particularly smaller businesses, to look into and hopefully capitalize on commercial opportunities in China is something that is really central to EuroChambers' DNA, and something that we're really happy and ready to remain involved in the future, as we have been for over a decade now in the past. Going back to those two major pieces of information, firstly, that China is a big market. Yes, clearly it is. For the EU and China are two of the biggest traders in the world. The Chinese market is growing. Even given the situation of the last couple of years, the growth of the Chinese market is really significant. EU imports from China are massive. They relate to industrial goods, to consumer goods, to machinery, equipment, textiles, and of course EU exports to China are also really significant, often highly sophisticated products, machinery, equipment, motor vehicles, aircrafts, chemicals. So China is a massively important market, not just for the big household names, but also for SMEs in those complex supply chains that create those technically elaborate goods and products. And it's a challenged economy as well, China. So that's the second of my 2 points, that it's a difficult economy in some respects. They have internal demographic problems. They have skills issues. There are issues around the political, the openness of the political system, and the amount of spending, state spending needed. And of course, EU trade relations with China are not entirely smooth either. China joined the World Trade Organization 20 years ago now, but there's still a lot of room despite progress, and there are a lot of problems that remain in terms of transparency, in terms of non-tariff barriers that European business encounters, in terms of government intervention, in terms of intellectual property rights. And I think some of those are encapsulated in the problems that we are encountering at the moment with the EU-China investment agreement, which of course has frozen in the institutional negotiations within the EU until China lifts sanctions that have been imposed on several Europeans, including members of the European Parliament, and that was some months ago. So there are problems as well. So big market plus a lot of issues, which again I think underlines why we're so happy to be involved in this program. EuroChambres has been involved in the EU SME Centre in China for ever since it started, in fact, and we still are, and we're very happy to do so, as I mentioned. And I think Renzo will go into more details about that, of course, but just to say that this is to us a really fundamental way of making sure that smaller businesses in Europe are able to do business with China and in China. Of course, COVID has complicated matters even further, so I think that really adds an extra layer of importance and pertinence to the program over the next couple of days. So I'm delighted to be here in the opening session and to have the opportunity to wish you all a great couple of days. And on that note, I will hand back to Laura. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. It is indeed true that EuroChambre has been involved in the project since the beginning, and as you mentioned, China is a great market, but there is room to grow it and to improve the position of European SMEs in China. And connecting to this comment, I would like to introduce the last but not least speaker of the opening remarks, Mr. Renzo Isler, Director at the EU SME Center, who will be presenting a little bit more in detail what the EU SME Center does for those European businesses looking into the Chinese market. Renzo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laura. Good morning and good afternoon to all of you from a very nice and shining Beijing, and not polluted, I would say, Beijing. It is a great pleasure to be here with all of you connected from all your respective countries to kickstart this Understanding China training program. From what I can see, there are many of you who registered to our training, testifying that China remains an important topic on the agendas of several entrepreneurs and organizations in Europe. I am Renzo Isler. I'm the director of the EU SME Center, and I'm speaking to you from our offices here in Beijing. Our goal in these 2 days is to share with you as much information we can about China's economic, trade, and legislative scenarios, which are unfolding in an ever intricate way. I think that Ben was quite clear in underlying how these difficulties are unfolding. The EU SME Center is a project financed by the European Commission, which has been running for over 10 years, and which has been able over time to help hundreds of SMEs and business service organizations to make the right choice on when, how, and with whom to do business in China. This is the third phase of the project, which is run by EuroChambre, the Italian, Danish, and European chambers in China, plus the British Business Council. Phase 3 will run till March of next year, Phase 4 is already in the pipeline and will run in continuation of phase 3 till spring of 2025. The EU SME Center, as many of you already know, is offering services in 4 major areas, free of charge to those institutions which choose to register with us. We have a famous knowledge center, which provides comprehensive market reports, guidelines, and case studies. We then have an advice center, which gives practical and confidential advice on business development, market access, legal and HR issues. We have a training center, which has the objective to provide face-to-face whenever available because of COVID. But most importantly, we have also online training programs to raise EU SMEs awareness of China-related business issues. And last, definitely, but not least, we offer an advocacy platform, providing coherent, consistent, and consolidated voice for European SMEs via the Interchamber SME Working Group at the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China. Of all the services that are available on our website, I want to highlight in particular 2. The Ask the Expert feature, which allows you to have preferential access to our experts in many trade and commerce areas. And the self-diagnosis tool, which is a very powerful online tool that allows you to gauge your readiness in developing your business strategy in China. I really recommend for you to just go on our website and click on them and have a look. These tools, together with a great number of sector reports, recorded webinars, a score of news and publications, and much more are available on our website, which I remind you is www.eusmecenter.org.cn. But also you can come and visit us or contact us at the info@eusmecenter.org.cn. Wish you all a good half-day training, and I look forward to connecting with you during these 2 days. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Renzo, and thanks again, Igor and Ben, for making yourself available today. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce you the first speaker of the day, Ms. Esther Cañada Amela, who is the Advocacy Manager at the EU SME Center. She's going to present the China Policy Environment and EU SME Business Confidence Survey. Esther Cañada Amela is the manager of the advocacy platform at the EU SME Center. And as part of her work, she manages the Chamber's Standards and Conformity Assessment Working Group. She coordinates as well the relations with European institutions, institutional stakeholders, and monitors and analyzes relevant EU policies. Esther, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laura. Allow me then to share my screen for everybody to see. I hope that you can see it. Okay, so first of all, thank you all for joining this session. And I would like to start my intervention by talking a bit about why we're putting this presentation first, SME policy environment in China, and why advocacy is actually very important for SMEs. So, of course, SMEs are companies that have limited resources and limited people to work on many different issues. That's why sometimes they will have difficulties following some developments in terms of laws and regulations that could be important for them to be aware of. And that's really what we come in for here at the advocacy platform of the EU SME Center. We basically try to take out the burden from SMEs, and we create a platform where we provide a voice for European small businesses, and where we convey other key issues and recommendations to both Chinese and European policymakers. So my presentation today is going to focus mostly on what is happening in China in terms of business environment and policy environment. So first of all, I am going to talk about the self-evident, and that is that in the same way as in Europe, SMEs are a pillar of the European economy, in China, they are also a foundational component of the Chinese economy. You can see that in both cases, they constitute a majority of businesses. They contribute considerably to GDP and to jobs, as well as to taxes. And I would like to talk a bit about SME internationalization from the European perspective. And we have this Eurobarometer that was carried out in 2015. And you can see that 50% of European SMEs do international business, but only 19% of SMEs that export do so outside of the EU. And I mean, that highlights the big challenge, the big step that it is for a European SME to go into a third market that is not in the EU, and the amount of support that they need from either their respective governments or from European projects like the EU SME Center or the IP SME Help Desk. When you look at the top barriers, I believe that none of you is going to be surprised to see administrative issues or red tape, lack of partners, delivery costs, and of course, money issues, the cost of financing internationalization. But let's now move to China and how SMEs have experienced the ups and downs in the Chinese economic development in the past few years. So I would like to point your attention to the SME Development Index. That is this graph that you can see in the screen. This is developed by the China Association for SMEs. And basically it collects information from thousands of SMEs and creates an index that is a composite of different aspects, whether it is financing or red tape or other related issues. And you can see that SMEs took a huge hit because of COVID-19. You can see that in the index, there was a drop in the first quarter of 2020, and then the Chinese SME kind of economy really has not gone up, and this has been consistently an issue for SMEs. I mean, it's true that China bounced back rather quickly in terms of COVID-19 and like going back to work, etc. But SMEs were just consistently behind big companies. So as you can see, even now, there is still a gap from 2019, from the last quarter of 2019. And SMEs are really feeling it, both domestic and international SMEs. Also, I want to share with you this interesting table. It's a bit difficult to read. We are happy, I believe, to share the slides if requested after the session. But this is another report that was developed by the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology in China. And that rates 36 main cities in China in terms of the environment for SMEs. And you can see that Shanghai, unsurprisingly, is on top in the overall ratings and in most of the ratings, like market environment, policy environment, innovation environment. But there is a huge gap between the best performers and the worst ones. You can see the worst one in here is Lhasa. So this also goes to show that China is really more of a continent than a country, and SMEs should really pay attention to where they want to settle when they enter the Chinese market, because there is a huge difference in terms of the support that they will get or the environment that they will enjoy depending on the cities and on the provinces. Now, looking a bit from the perspective of European companies in the past year, the European Chamber of Commerce, with which we work at the EU SME Center for advocacy-related issues, publishes every year 2 main documents: its business confidence survey and its position paper. And when you look at the business confidence survey, you see that although year-on-year revenues were the worst in a decade, still 42% of respondents actually did see revenues in 2020. And in fact, for some companies, I mean, China was really like one of the very few markets where they actually saw positive numbers in 2020. The supply chain disruptions had an important effect on the strategy of companies. So you can see that 1/4 of respondents were planning to onshore their operations in China. And of course, travel restrictions. I mean, companies really suffered and are still suffering because of travel restrictions. 70+% of companies were affected in 2020, and that exacerbates a trend that has been going on for 5 years. In the past 5 years, 35% of companies have seen a decrease in the number of foreign employees that they hire. Still, even though China has bounced back, I would say, from COVID-19 more or less well, this economic situation globally and also in China really is still not easy, which means that the reforms and the opening up that China has been promising for years becomes even more of an urgent issue to address. This is also something that we discuss in the European Chamber's position paper. The fact that China is going into a self-reliance mode because of supply chain disruptions, but also because of difficult geopolitical situation with other countries. So they're trying to secure production of key technologies, or they try to secure their supply chains in terms of key materials. And of course, there is a big component of national security involved in this self-reliance push. However, what the European Chamber sees and what European Chamber members see, both big and small companies, is that this push for self-reliance is going to have measurable economic costs. And you can see here, for instance, this graph from the European Chamber's position paper that was developed by the World Bank. And you can see 3 projections for China's growth, depending on the level of opening up, so until 2050. And you can see that in a scenario with comprehensive reforms and in a scenario of limited reforms, there is a gap of 21,000 plus US dollars per capita. That means, I mean, you have to multiply this by 1.3 billion people. That's a huge amount of money that is costing China because of this push for self-reliance. The European Chamber position paper includes an SME specific report where SMEs talk about the main issues really that are affecting them. And as you can see, those are access to financing, red tape, the reduction of a financial burden in payments, and IPR protection. I'm not going to go into each of them because of time constraints, but I would like to say that in all of these aspects, there have been positive developments in the past few years. But again, these positive developments are not distributed equally in the whole of China, as I mentioned before. There is a big gap between best performer cities and provinces and worst performing cities and provinces. But also there is another aspect, and that is, although these issues are affecting both European or foreign SMEs and domestic SMEs, in many cases, European SMEs are more heavily affected because they incur extra costs and extra risk because this is not their home market. So we have a couple of recommendations, and I'm not going to go also very much into detail into them because I know that my colleague Alessio is going to talk a bit more in detail about those. But I think I would like to highlight perhaps one or two of these. And the first one is you have to make use of all resources available. Of course, like we have the EU SME Center, that is an EU funded project, but a lot of European countries have platforms that provide support to companies wanting to internationalize. And the EU also has other projects that can provide support to SMEs, for instance, the IP SME Help Desk, Enterprise Europe Network. So just make sure that that you get as much support as possible from these platforms. And then another maybe recommendation that I would like to highlight is know your ecosystem, know the Chinese ecosystem. I've talked about the different provinces and the differences between different provinces, but also China is a market that in some areas is pretty sui generis. It's a very exciting market. It's very dynamic, and yeah, in a lot of cases, different from the European market. So make sure that you know your ecosystem and you know your channels for sales or for provision of services. I'm going to stop here, but I'm happy to take questions from the audience. Perhaps before leaving, I'll leave you with some reading material. We have two main reports that we publish here at the advocacy platform of the EU SME Center. That is the policy environment report and the position paper. And of course, the EU SME Center develops a lot of very useful reports that cover both horizontal issues or sector-specific, industry-specific issues. So I am going to end here and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Esther, for this insightful presentation. I have a first question. In the meantime, the rest of the participants put their mind together and they throw questions to you. You were mentioning about the different conditions considering in different provinces. Could you please elaborate a little bit more about these conditions you were talking about?
Absolutely. So maybe let me go back to the slide. There we go. To this slide. So as I mentioned, I mean, for an SME, it's essential to know that again, China is not monolithic, and of course, different provinces or even different cities or villages are are going to perform better in different sectors. So of course, maybe when you talk to SMEs and when you discuss like how to enter the Chinese market, where to establish your offices or your production site, a lot of people will think Beijing and Shanghai, and with good reason. I mean, in the end, those are the capital cities, and they have a strong support network, and they offer a lot of services. However, these cities also have really high costs. However, again, like there are so many options for SMEs, and you can see that Beijing and Shanghai are not the only top performers. You have cities that are considered second-tier cities or third-tier cities that also have a good environment and would have potentially less costs for SMEs that want to establish themselves, or perhaps they have a better network for distribution of products, or their customer base is more attractive. I mean, second and third tier cities are supposed to be cities where in the future a lot of Chinese population will just flow into them, and that's also something that that SMEs that maybe want to sell certain products for the Chinese growing middle class should take into account. So again, I think that it's really important to consider very carefully the different options that you have as a small company in terms of establishing yourself, the pros and cons, really. Yeah.
Okay, well, we got a few questions as well from the audience. Somebody representing Lithuanian businesses would like to get your opinion on the latest development of China-Lithuania business relations due to the Lithuanian government stance over the Taiwan case. Do you have any thought about how this could develop further on?
Well, I'm afraid I don't have a crystal ball, really, but I can talk to the impact of the politicization of business on companies. In general, at the EUSME Center and the European Chamber, I mean, companies do try to keep themselves out of business, out of these political questions. However, this is becoming more and more complicated, and companies can sometimes get squeezed into these political discussions. This is why really advocacy is such an important aspect of doing business in a country, because in a country like China especially, that can be a bit complicated, because it is really important to convey to both European and Chinese policymakers what these developments in the bilateral relations are doing to businesses and how they are affecting them. So I mean, again, I don't have a crystal ball, but what I can say is that moving forward, it will be extremely important to continue communicating with both governments. China, it remains an extremely important market for European companies. If you look at the business confidence survey from this year of the European Chamber, only 9% of companies, of European companies, were planning to leave the country. I mean, a lot of business people mentioned that really, I mean, if you're not in China, you're not a global company, or and also like China is really a fitness club for businesses. So again, I mean, China remains attractive, but companies will need to consider how to navigate the increasingly complex political situation. And again, for that, platforms like the EU SME Center advocacy platform or the European Chamber or national chambers are a good avenue for companies to express their issues, concerns, recommendations.
Thank you very much, Esther. Indeed, it's important to raise your voice concerning, let's say, the issues that impact your company, bring it to your, as Esther mentioned, national chambers or any other authority that can represent you. As we mentioned, we have a SME working group within the SME Center, together with the European Chambers of Commerce China, that can help you to bring these concerns to the political level and do some policy on your behalf. I would like to go through the next question. This is, well, not tricky, but it's also something we are aware of. How can you be sure of the statistics, since it's usually a major concern in China?
Well, the simple answer is you can't be, but those are the only numbers you get. So, of course, in terms of trade flows, you can rely on other sources, for instance, the Eurostat. But in the end, I mean, if you need to rely on figures like, I don't know, numbers of companies in China, or like maybe inbound FDI, etc., you do have limited options, really. And in the end, the sources, like in some cases, the sources from the Chinese government are the only thing that you're going to get. And that is true for us as the EU SME Center, but also for organizations that are much bigger than us. The World Bank, IMF, like you get the numbers you get, and then of course how you make your calculations is a different story, right? I mean, you can extrapolate, you can ask as well how the calculations are made from the Chinese side. Again, there are questions or there are clarifications you could potentially request in order to better understand how you can reach these numbers.
Thank you very much, Esther. There's a question about supply chain. I will throw the ball to you, but as everybody knows, we also have a presentation on supply chain happening tomorrow. So don't bother to elaborate much if you feel that it's a little bit out of your scope. You mentioned about supply chain disruptions. Could you please elaborate about that? Which are the main risks for SMEs and how can they react?
Well, yes, as you said, Laura, there is going to be a presentation tomorrow, so I don't want to talk a lot about it, but what I can do is I can provide some examples of how European SMEs operating in China dealt with the situation with COVID-19 and with supply chains. So, for instance, last year, when we were consulting the impact of supply chain disruptions on SMEs, we encountered a very interesting case that was a manufacturer in the south of China, and it was an interesting case because there were a number of best practices that they carried out like early on in the outbreak. But also because really at the beginning, what saved them was their business model. So, for instance, this company like developed the bulk of their orders and prepared the bulk of their orders in advance in November and December, which meant that when COVID-19 hit, at the end of January, beginning of February, this company was able to deliver to their customers. Of course, afterwards, what they encountered was problems with their suppliers from outside of China, right? As COVID spread to other countries. And that resulted in this company looking into localizing their supply chain in order to make it more resilient. As I mentioned, 1/4 of companies that responded to the business competence survey are looking into onshoring their supply chains.
Thank you very much, Esther. We also received a couple of questions through the chat, and I think we can finalize with them. One of them is also really related with your standpoint regarding upcoming developments in the policy negotiation or discussions between the EU and China, as it seems that the President Jörg Gorter, the President of the European Chambers of Commerce China, last evening also expressed some fears regarding the future for international collaboration for SMEs. How do we, or the EU SME Center and the European Chambers of Commerce China, oversee the future developments in the negotiations?
Again, I don't necessarily have a crystal ball on these. I would say that, of course, SMEs, as a rule of thumb, really get the short end of the stick in any development that affects the business community. So just to give you an example, European SMEs have been heavily affected by the travel restrictions because basically they have less people. So the people, like the foreign experts that they have, maybe take on more responsibilities, and if they cannot bring back these people, or if they cannot hire new people, then this work, like, who does this work? And of course, China has a very strong talent pool, increasingly strong. But again, a lot. It's sometimes there are things that maybe only foreign experts or people that work in headquarters can do. And again, also it's very important for companies to be able to have an exchange of personnel and giving them the opportunity to experience what work and what, like, developing the work in your company is like in China is increasingly important, because again, the Chinese market is very dynamic. The customer base is extremely demanding, and it's really a fitness club. So yes, it's always a bit more complicated for SMEs, I would say. But what I would also say is that it's important that communication on best practices from both sides continues, because in the end, I mean, it's important to speak with each other and understand where each side is coming from and where they're going. And maybe just one last thing about communication, and that is a positive example that we saw in terms of exchanges of best practices. There is an annual EU-China SME policy dialogue, and for years the European counterparts have been providing examples of a best practice on late payments. As some of you may know, the EU has its late payments directive, and China did not have a similar thing. And of course, SMEs have traditionally been very much affected by these late payments, especially from state-owned enterprises. Last year, finally, China rolled out some regulations that would aim to protect SMEs from late payments, and that establish more clarity and penalties and clear timelines. So of course, I mean, when you do advocacy, it's really difficult to say, oh, this was all thanks to us. But I think that communication on these best practices was useful.
Indeed, thank you very much, Esther. And the last question, and I think this relates also with this question, how vulnerable are SMEs to these changes in the policy position? Should they want to take actions against the country? I assume that this question also relates perhaps to IP-related matters.
Well, policy changes, the way I understand this question, and of course, Andrea can correct me if I'm wrong, is more about coercive actions that China may take against companies in cases of worsening bilateral relations with other countries. And of course, we have seen examples. We have seen Lithuania, but we have also seen like issues with Sweden and for instance, the boycott of textile producers as following the sanctions. So I would say that if what we're talking about is coercive measures or potentially coercive measures, I would say that SMEs would be relatively safe because the target of these coercive measures would have to be big enough really to make us splash and to make a dent. So in that sense, yes, I would say that SMEs would not necessarily be the main target of retaliation from the Chinese side. I would say that what's more concerning are overall policy developments that, for instance, have a national security component. We have seen the rollout of several laws and regulations related to the digital sphere. We have the data security law, we have the personal information protection law. I would say that those are likely to have a bigger impact on SMEs than any retaliatory move, direct retaliatory move that China may make. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you very much, Esther. I think we can conclude in here. If any other question, I will make sure that bring it to you bilaterally. But well, it was a very insightful review of the situation right now and the insights of the SMEs regarding the Chinese market.